All right, we are live. Welcome, everyone who's just joining us from wherever you are. This is our fourth and final lunchtime chat celebrating Juneteenth, and we are going to be getting started in just a couple of minutes. So come on in and get comfortable. Go ahead and put where you're from in the comments section if you're interested, or the chat section of whatever platform you're joining us from. Now we have Trinidad and Tobago. We have Colorado and Maryland. Welcome. Texas, Florida. It's fun to have you all here. I'm excited to talk to Brian and Shelley from the International African American Museum and Center for Family History. So we're going to have fun today. Again, we're going to be getting started with our questions in just a few minutes. Welcome, Donna from Baltimore, Terry from Virginia. Looks like Tom Reed's joining us also. Welcome, Tom. I think he's the mastermind behind this whole thing, so it's good to have him here. All right, we'll be getting started in just about another minute, so come on in and get comfortable. Scottsdale, Arizona. Ooh, I bet it's hot down there today. Yeah, Erin has reminded us to post your questions for Brian and Shelley in the comments section, and we are going to answer as many questions as we can at the end. So as you think of questions, go ahead and put them in the chat or the comments, and we will take a look at those at the end of our presentation. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to Roots to Freedom, celebrating Juneteenth with Family Search and Roots Tech. My name is Julia Anderson, and I'm an accredited genealogist and research specialist at the Family Search Library in Salt Lake City. And there I specialize in research in the United States, specifically in the Gulf South region and African American research. In honor of Juneteenth, every Wednesday during the month of June, I've been hosting lunchtime chats with leading experts on African American heritage and genealogy. Today, I'm here with Brian Sheffy and Dr. Shelley Viola Murphy of the International African American Museum in South Carolina. We'll be highlighting resources there, specifically the Center for Family History and how they're enabling people to connect with their African American heritage. So thank you so much for joining us today. So much thought and preparation has gone into the creation of the museum and the center. Everything from its location to its logo has really important significance. Shelley, can you tell us a little bit about the vision that inspired the creation of the museum and the center?
Sure, and welcome everyone, and thanks for having us here. There was a former mayor of Charleston, and it was Mayor Joe Riley. I believe he had the overall vision of having that museum built there, and they consider it like a ground zero. So, place is very important for the whole realm of the museum and the Center for Family History. That vision actually was 20 or 22 years ago. And so it's just been, planning, designing, developing, and now we are there, open for a successful year now. And Brian will tell more about that. But yes, that comes from the vision of what was happening there, the Gadsden's Wharf location as a port and so forth.
Thank you, Shelley. Brian, do you have anything to add about the beginning of the center and the museum itself?
Well, again, thank you so much for the invitation to speak and to chat about the Center for Family History. I really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you everyone for joining us for this conversation. As Shelley was saying, the port of Charleston, which is comprised of many wharves, it's centuries old, and millions of enslaved Africans were brought through here, either directly from Africa or from the Caribbean. And it is it is a real privilege to be able to be here helping people research their ancestry. And I just want to say, it is unusual for a museum to have a Center for Family History. I'm only aware of two. And anyone can correct me if I'm wrong on that one, but there's the Underground Railroad in Ohio, and then there's the Smithsonian's African American History Museum. So that already puts us in a very kind of unique company. And the way that I explain why we exist is the exhibits and the art gallery side of the museum tells the large overarching historical experience, the Black experience in the United States of what would become the United States of America. What you find in the Center for Family History are the tools, resources, and stories that form the individual pebbles that relate to each one, to something in the museum itself about the large overarching kind of history of African Americans in the country. So you can find a story about a free person of color in a Center for Family History where someone has done that research and has shared those records. You will find corresponding pieces of information about the general experience of free people of color in this country. So that's the relationship between those two spaces.
Fantastic. It sounds like the center is where things really come alive for the guests that come to the museum, and they can really connect to their ancestry and their family and the overall experience. That's fantastic. So, Brian, what would a typical day at the Center for Family History be like?
Well, if I could just sneakily segue and before I get into that, you were talking about the people's experience. Well, you don't actually have to be in the museum to
Right.
experience some of what we have to offer. So I was asked to do a quick shout out about some numbers. So here are some numbers for you. So remembering that the Center for Family History, the physical space also has to be rentable. It's a rentable space. So everything that's in there has to be movable. Sometimes we have to move everything out to make space for a big event. So instead of having a tower computer that most people are used to, if you go to a Center for Family History, there's normally a desk and a computer, and you sit there and you do your work. We have research iPads, which are every bit as powerful as computers, as desktop computers, loaded with loads of databases. That are there for people to research their ancestry, specifically African American. So, since March of 2024, 4,575 unique people have used our iPads for research purposes. And we've only had, I specifically calling out March because that was the first time that people could come into the center and actually research their family history. Before then, it was just a gallery space with lots of stories. We have a webinar that was started by Dr. Shelley Murphy that has now become a podcast. We call that the Untold African American Stories podcast. Since June of 2023, we've had just under 7,000 people tune in live or stream our on-demand versions of the webinars. So again, you can get just amazing webinars from some of the top African American genealogists and historians or people who study that or are knowledgeable about that without even coming into the museum. Wonderful, wonderful series. Uh, our in-house genealogy 101 sessions, since the museum opened up its doors in June 2023, we have delivered that to just under 4,000 people. And we have something called Story Booth, which Shelley and I are going to get into in a little bit more details. But we have a purpose-built recording studio in the Center for Family History. It's called Story Booth, where people can leave up to 2-minute audio clips or video clips. And we have 3,907 of those since the museum opened. So that's really amazing. I'm going to say there's no typical day for the Center for Family History. It depends on how many people are in the museum at any given point in time. But the start of the day for the team is we log it. We have 4 information kiosks, which have workable versions of Family Search on them. Because we found that a lot of people, probably 9 out of 10 people who come to the center have never heard of Family Search before and have never used Family Search. So we love showing them that because it's free. And that immediately gets people excited and happy, and they're champing at the bit to get in there. We have 4 of those, and then we have 6 iPads, so we have to log into our account on all of them, including like our library version of Ancestry and Fold3 and all of those good ProQuest sites. We have to log into those every day, make swab everything down because of COVID and germs and stuff, making sure that everything is working the way that it should and is clean and operational. Then it's worth remembering the museum is shut on a Monday to the public. We're here, but it's not open to the public. So really, our working week is from Tuesday to Sunday, from 10 till 5. And it's a mixture of doing our research projects. We're also doing virtual or online genealogy consultations. People are, we have to come onto the floor quite often during the day to answer myriads of questions. Everything from how do I get started researching to I'm having trouble finding the specific ancestor. Can you help me while I'm here in the center? Or helping people access the books in our reference library. Um, like today, we are packed. It is very, very busy. So by the end of the day, I'm sure our voices will be croaky and creaky, but we will feel happy because we will have helped a lot of people.
Yes.
Wow, what a lot of resources you have available. That's just absolutely incredible. Shelley, you're in charge of the programming for the center, is that right?
I do the educational programs. Brian comes up with an idea or a target and says, I want a presentation or I want to know about this. I come up with some. So I design them and develop them. And also in charge of those monthly webinars. That's on the third Saturday of each month at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And so I want to open this up also to tell people that if there's a topic or a situation that you think would be a good discussion with a panel, please contact us if there's something that, we're not addressing. And so we have them every month and they've been going good. And I love hearing the numbers about that. And it's educational. And I think that's really what that backbone is education about how to. And if there's challenges, here's some strategies to help get out of that. So it's a great opportunity for people either visiting online or to be able to walk into that center and also on a regular basis attend these talks. There's also short videos from some top genealogists around the country that gives their best tip, just under 5 minutes. So those are also on the YouTube playlist that people can access. So it's just another opportunity to help people reconnect with their ancestors.
Great. It sounds like you're trying to engage people from all ages and backgrounds and find something that they'll all enjoy. That's wonderful.
Can I speak on that for just a minute? And it also touches on a question that OVO Oils just asked.
Well, I was going to get to that and tell you, please tell about the Centenarians. Go ahead.
Well, actually, okay, so now I have two.
Yes.
And actually they're two great examples because you want to talk about two completely different kind of demographics. Hate using marketing terms, but there you go. It is what it is. We do a lot, our education division does a lot of school tours. And I remember there was a group of junior high school age students. They were mostly girls. They were supposed to be looking for specific pieces of information in the museum. It's like almost like an information kind of egg hunt, kind of a thing that they have to do. Well, they got into the Center for Family History and they got on our iPads. They weren't supposed to, but they did. And there were just squeals of delight because, again, these young ladies who were probably 14 or 15 years old, I remember one of them was immediately on the phone to her mom going, Mom, I found your great grandparents. Did you know that they lived in North Charleston and that your your grandfather was he was a driver for a fruit and veg company and he owned his own home and he could read and he could write. She was getting all this information from the census records. And you could just feel that the pride in this young African American girl that she had found an ancestor. She'd found someone related to her, her mother's ancestor. was finding out information and asking, have you heard about this daughter Priscilla? I've never heard of a Priscilla, and asking all these questions. And she was just so pleased. Next thing, she's on the phone to her dad going, Dad, I found this information about your grandparents. And they were having a conversation that they had never had before, as parents and child. And I can just imagine that when she went home, she was still just as excited. And they probably had I hope they had a wonderful conversation around the dinner table. And I hope that we inspired her to actually become the next generation of genealogists. Because that's, even though that's not part of my mandated purpose, that's something that I'm
Mhm.
really passionate about, getting the next younger generations really interested in it. Polar opposite,
Fantastic.
we have this thing called Centenarian stories, where we formally interview their broadcast quality 90-year-old plus, and their 90-year-olds aren't centenarians, but they're 90 and above. They've lived a long
Mhm.
time, they've seen a lot of history, and they have a lot of stories to tell. And yet, I should say this specifically, African Americans who are 90 and above. And we had a 109-year-old lady called Mrs. Ursel Chillis, who is 100, like I said, she's 109. She lives on Johns Island, just right outside of Charleston. And she had some remarkable stories that you can actually see on the CFH playlist on the International African American Museum's YouTube channel. So you can get the full video, the full video. But she was born in a hurricane in South Carolina in 1914. She talks about the day that she was born, which the story that she was told. It was a horrible hurricane. It was 1914. The creek near the house was beginning to flood. Her mother was in labor, put on a mattress on
Love
a
it.
cart, drawn by a mule up a hillside to keep her mother out, from
Yes.
drowning, from drowning basically, and that's how her mother gave birth to her. Then the other story was the story about her grandparents who were in Alabama. These are her paternal grandparents. Their ancestry came from Charleston. They were taken to Alabama by their enslavers. Well, between 1872 and 1873, her grandparents, with their 7 sons, walked from Alabama back to Charleston because that's where her grandparents knew that they had roots. But it wasn't the homecoming that they came here for. Her grandfather had thought, well, if the ships brought my ancestors from Africa to Charleston, I should be able to get on a boat and take my family back to Africa because I don't want to be here. I want to be in Africa. And unfortunately, it didn't work that way. There were no boats to take them from Charleston to Africa. So within a couple of years, they all worked. They all saved their money. They bought land, and Mrs. Ursel Chillis actually still owns 50 acres of her grandfather's original plot.
Wow, that really
Love those
is a set
stories.
of inspirational stories.
Yes.
I think those are part of the tapestry of American history, and I'm so glad that you're preserving those. That's just fantastic.
Mhm.
Shelley, do you have any tips for anyone that's just getting started in their family history and what they can do?
Absolutely. But I will say, coming up in July, the webinar on the third Saturday is actually getting started with genealogy. And Brian and a couple other renowned genealogists will be on the panel. And it is designed to talk about just getting started, very similar to, but building on the daily sessions that are held in the museum at 11 a.m. and at 2 p.m., Genealogy 101. And we want to make sure that we have that and it's stored so people can access that. So, some of the first things I always tell people to get started with is to start with what they know. They know themselves, their date of birth, their parents, and so forth. And then the next generation. Start writing down what you know and then develop the questions. Everybody should have goals of who they're looking for, what they're trying to find out. Because if not, you're kind of all over the place. And you start gathering things, but there's no order. So also to think about what are you going to do with your files once you start, you know, gathering information, documents, and things. How are you going to store them? So, again, planning the research is another thing. Starting with yourself, writing down what you know, think about the questions or the goals that you want to know, and then start building the strategies from there with a research plan. And understanding that in the age that we are now, technology is awesome. You've got the webinars online. You can Google and find other webinars to help, the books, the libraries, partnering or joining with a historical society, understanding ancestry.com and familysearch.org, what's available for them, and then think about the communities that you're going to research. I would start logging, what do I need to know about the county I'm researching or the state? And so I think just staying with the basics. It doesn't matter how many years you've been doing this, because there's no magic here. This is actually page by page or down by down, or being in the local community. And I would also advise people to focus on the local community where their ancestors were at, and not just looking at surnames. Who's there? Who's around them? And if it's during slave era time, who has access? And being able to understand when that community came about. Because think about it, somebody could be born, and I'm going to say 1820, and they live there all their life and they don't die to say 1900. But you know what? They have not moved, but those county lines could have moved. So they need to understand that local research in that local area is really critical to find out the origins of the county, because I might think, okay, I see them in 1900 and this is where they're at. But wait a minute, in 1850, that county didn't exist. It was another county. So understanding the ways of tracking where records and resources could be, and that community research is another vital thing. And again, there's a lot of how-tos, there's a lot of books that are out to help people getting started, but always start with what you know. And Brian, if you want to add to some of that, Brian's
Yeah.
got an excellent workbook too, and gonna toot the horn. That's it's a workbook. And again, find the right workbook, find the right site that you're comfortable with and you understand, and then get a genealogy buddy and join these groups. Go ahead.
I'm going to jump on the other side and say again, I think what surprises people is how important critical thinking is in
Yeah.
terms of genealogy. All things being equal, is this, are all the records I'm finding for a man called Charles Smith really for the same man, or were there
Yeah.
records for different men called
Right.
Charles Smith? Because again, I see it on people's family trees. You can have an
Mhm.
individual who was living purportedly in Edgefield, South Carolina, then Richmond, Virginia, then Shelby County, Tennessee, then he's over in California. I'm like, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. This could be like the 1880s. And I'm like, I know that some African Americans moved around like that, but that would be really unusual. So trying to teach people and give them the skills to really be able to assess, are they attaching the correct record to the correct
Mhm.
person correct person in their family tree. Critical thinking is just, it's an unspoken,
Yes.
underappreciated, but such an essential genealogy skill. It really, really is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, what do you suggest? What resources do you have available for more advanced researchers?
As Shelley was mentioning, we have the reference library, which on our website, it's free to join. People can
Mhm.
reserve books up to 48 hours before they actually plan on coming to the museum, just to make sure they're going to be available. Information about how to join that is on the museum's website under the Center for Family History. We're also busy digitizing a whole raft of records and building what's an online archive. So we're starting with South Carolina. We're just digitized about half of our South Carolina microfilm. So we will be getting that up online before the end of this year. We have the United States Colored Troop pension applications. We now have just over 3,000 of those. So again, busy digitizing them, putting in all the metadata and getting those up into our archive. Family photographs or high quality, high resolution photographs of family portraits. So anything prior to 1970 is digital images that we're looking to acquire to be able to put them up in the archive, and funeral programs. We now have just under 350 African American funeral programs, and just always putting call outs to African Americans. You know, if your family have funeral programs, if you have old photographs, one way that you can actually memorialize these ancestors in perpetuity isn't actually donating the physical item to us, but providing a high quality, high resolution, preferably 600 DPI image of, it could be a family photograph, it could be a funeral program. We actually have descendants of enslavers who are reaching out to us now saying, well, I found, my family have plantation books and plantation ledgers and dated lists of enslaved people. So long as there are records that aren't readily available elsewhere, like if you do a family search, catalog search under kind of like estate inventories and probate records, so long as it's not already in the public domain, it's a record that we would be very interested in having a digital copy, and with your permission and a very simple permission form to complete, we can add it to our archive. So those are some of the advanced. Unfortunately, people can't access our microfilm that is in our office, and that's strictly a staff-only space, which again is the reason why we're very keen to get everything microfilmed and up online. And the other part of that is we couldn't do any of this without our donors and our sponsors.
Yeah.
This is all very expensive stuff to do. That's why not everyone is out there doing it. So we are very deeply appreciative to our sponsors, which also includes the Church of Latter-day Saints. Our center wouldn't have existed without a very generous donation from the church to make those kind of resources available, and again, not made available in a way that you don't physically have to come here to be able to access. Although we want to see you. We love seeing you. We love seeing you. We hope we will see you. We understand if we can't, and the records are still there for you.
Fantastic. So we had a question come in the chat from Dasharoo. It says, what's the most surprising thing that has happened at the museum in the first year being open?
Ooh. Well, that's a good one. Wow. I can think so many things are running in line here. You go first, Brian.
I was going to say, while you're thinking, I'll give you a lifeline on that one. I think one of the things I learned was actually about myself. I've realized that because I've been doing this research for almost 4 decades now, I do have this thing called academic distance. I've got a very thick skin. I can read really unpleasant, unfortunate, tragic things and not let it affect me until after I finish doing the research, and then I can have my feelings. I realize I have to be very careful and very measured about when I'm with someone actually helping them do their research, because I'll just say something that is bog standard about slavery. Someone finds out that their ancestor was only 14 years old when she gave birth. That's an upsetting thing for someone to find out, to realize. And I have to realize I can't be. It's not that I'm cold-hearted. That's not the right phrase. I'm very matter of fact, and I have to realize that I have to give a little bit more, couch things in more in terms, and be more emotionally kind of support or aware of how people can react to it. Because I've had people burst into tears, literally burst into tears, running into the office to get a box of tissues and do that kind of aftercare. And I think, again, probably another conversation for another show. There is a psychological component to doing your family research. You don't know what you're going to find, and you don't know how you're going to react. And I'm much more mindful of that now that I'm director of a Center for Family History than if I was, say, just doing private one-on-one client research.
And I'll add an aspect to follow up with what he's saying, the emotional part of the research. but also the emotional part, like hearing the stories from the Centenarians or seeing people asking questions and walking over to the iPad or the kiosk and finding something, that we were able to help and give that information. I think it's the reconnecting or being able to find something. It doesn't matter what age you are or what experience you have, when you're able to make a connection, and it might not be a document, because not everything is on a document. Even though I know, as genealogists, first thing we do is go to the census. The next thing we're going to do is start going down our checklist. Well, some things could come from that oral history. And so I love the whole aspect of the story booth. And one of the things that we didn't make it clear, you come in and record your 2 minutes and you send it to yourself. So you have that recording. And what's better to come in and say, I just found my second great grandmother in a will where she got freed, or whatever the situation is. Or maybe my person came into Gadsden's Wharf and I got sold, and my family lines are now all coming out of New Orleans or some other state. So again, it's the reconnection, I think, is the most fascinating and most rewarding thing for me, myself, as a researcher, is to be able to help educate someone and say, well, why don't you try this, or check this out, or look at what other people have done and reframe that question for your research. So I think it's just an excellent opportunity for the time that we're in right now. More resources are available than ever, but also understand that new resources come up every day. So again, just keep plugging at it. So I would say that's the most rewarding for the first year, is the reconnecting and reclaiming some ancestors.
That's wonderful. Yeah, Brian, did you have something else you wanted to say?
I was going to say the other most surprising thing is just the general lack of understanding of American
Yeah.
history. And
Yeah.
I'm going to say I'm as guilty as anyone else. I didn't really learn American history until I
Mhm.
started doing genealogy. And
That's true.
we have a young intern in the office this week, and I've just spent,
Mhm.
showing her some research processes and things that I found. And she's like, "We never learned about this in school. We've never learned about this in school." Um, and there's still a lot more work that African American genealogists and researchers and historians, there are questions we have to answer, like how did enslaved people, when they became free, choose their surnames? DNA is telling me how many of my ancestors, why they took the name of their enslaver, because
Yeah.
their enslaver was their ancestor. That's
Mhm.
not the same for the east coast of South Carolina, where the Gullah Geechee are and were.
Yeah.
They've got a very different culture of enslavers. They very rarely lived in the same space as their enslavers. So there was less interactions kind of going on. How did they come up with their surnames? Because those surnames, they are research clues. They are, basically we have to do a little research whispering to understand why those surnames are the clues that they are. But they do point to specific families that people need to research.
Very good. So Debbie asked a question. She said she has ancestors who were slaveholders, and
Mhm.
they often named enslaved people in their wills. And she wants to know the best way to share their names, dates, places, and all that information. What can you tell her?
Shelley, do you want to introduce the Beyond Kin methodology?
Well, there's Beyond Kin, there's the 10 million names. Those are two projects that are in full force, actively going on, where people can support, or not, well, they can support, but they also can share the information, share the document, share the names, dates, and place, and things like that. Beyond Kin is the name of the website, and the 10 million names is another website. And so Family Search and the museum are, in support of both of those projects. So any other questions and things that come up, you can go to those main websites, and I'll put those in the chat for folks to be able to follow up on.
Fantastic. Danny asked how to make a donation and how to get involved in the museum and the center.
Yeah, I answered that. I'm sorry, in the chat. They can
Okay,
go to the
perfect.
main website page, look for the button for donation, and any questions and things about any support, they could send an email to C as in cat, F as in, well, there it is, it's on the screen. FNH at IAAmuseum.org for any follow-up questions regarding support or things like that. And again, we have, for those that are researching for genealogical help, could be a brick wall. They have the one-on-one genealogy consultations. You can also find the information there on the Center for Family History. If you go to the main page, click on the button up at the top right, says Center for Family History, and scroll down. They'll see the information and the requirements for the one-on-one consultations. Those are also very rewarding because there's things that we might have shared or direction that we might have given during that 45-minute session that just helps solve that brick wall or just helps them go one generation more. So the availability of that to the public is very good. And again, information on the main website.
And to give you an idea of difference of scale, all donations are definitely most welcome and appreciated. Individual donations tend to underwrite programs like our Centenarian stories because they are professionally videoed. They come with a cost. And those smaller donations are amazing in terms of supporting those kind of projects. When it comes to digitizing whole series of documents, we're looking at commercial kind of sponsors and donors, corporate sponsors and donors.
Oh,
To
yeah.
give you an instance, for 2025, I'm looking for something in the region of 5 to 6 million to be able to digitize African American Revolutionary War bounty land files, homesteaders,
Mhm.
those applications, their full files, looking to digitize War of 18, again, African American men and women who served in the War of 1812, their military files and their pension files. Same for Buffalo soldiers. These are all record sets that have not been digitized or not digitized widely. And just as a caveat, those USCT pension applications, they're held, the originals are held at the National Archives in DC. We are the largest holder of digital USCT pension application files at the moment,
Outside of
Fantastic.
NARA. Yes.
outside of
And
NARA.
those records are so rich genealogically and historically. That's so great that you're planning that in the future. So our time's about up, but I wanted to give you each a chance to say one thing. If our listeners could remember just one thing about the center and the museum from our talk today, what would you want it to be? Shelley, will you go first?
Uh, well, I would tell people one thing is to tune in to those monthly webinars. And like I mentioned, we've got getting started coming up in July, but we also will have 10 million names on there. And after that, we've got kinfolkology, which is Dr. Jenny Williams coming in from the University of Virginia about the domestic slave trade site and the ship manifests and things like that. So I'm hoping people will, sign in, keep in tune with us on those monthly webinars. We also have the South Carolina Historical Society coming on and the Low Country Digital Library coming on to have conversation. What do they have? How can that best help you with your research? So there's a lot of availability coming, and we'll end out the final year with the Black Loyalist Museum and folks from there talking about the museum. And I'll say the folks that left British America per se, United States of America, and end up in Canada and think about the Revolutionary War time frames. So just hoping that would be the takeaway is to attend those monthly webinars.
Great. Brian?
I'm
Brian.
I'm gonna say give yourself if you're going to visit the museum in person, give yourself the gift of time. Um, Do not try to cram everything into one day, because a lot of people who come here don't know that we are a fully functioning research center. So they spend a lot of time in the exhibits, as they should, in the museum part of it, and then they hit us and then they realize they don't have enough time because actually the center itself, the museum shuts at 5, we shut at 4. It takes an hour for us to kind of get ready and prep for the next day. So do it on multiple days. It literally, even though we are a much smaller museum than the DC Museum, it takes a day to work your way through the exhibits and the
Yeah.
galleries. That would allow you another day, if you can arrange your schedule that way, to just spend at the Center for Family History actually doing research.
Great advice. Wonderful. Well, that concludes our fourth and final Roots to Freedom Celebrating Juneteenth lunchtime chat. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to check out the Juneteenth at Family Search Roots Tech page for ongoing events and presentations all month long as we celebrate African American heritage and freedom. And thanks again, Brian and Shelley. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. Take
Thank
care,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.